I used to think my name meant something in that house. Joan Blake, daughter of Pastor Walter Blake and his wife, Carolyn. A family framed by stained glass and Sunday sermons full of phrases like blessings and God's plan. But when you're a child, you don't realize that some blessings are treated like burdens in disguise. Walter and Carolyn adopted me when I was 3 months old. They already had a son, Benjamin, and later had a daughter, Rachel. At church, they called me their little miracle, a story they told with soft smiles, how they opened their home to a child in need. But behind closed doors, I was never quite theirs. I was something they had taken on, not someone they had welcomed in. Benjamin had a nursery with cloud-painted walls. Mine was a corner room that used to be the laundry space. No window, just a small lamp that hummed when it stayed on too long. Rachel's bedspread matched her curtains and pink florals. Mine was a faded blanket someone left at the donation center. I never said anything. Gratitude was expected, and I was good at appearing grateful. Church folks adored the Blake family. Walter's sermons were polished. Carolyn's potlucks always well received. Raising 3 kids with such grace, they'd say, especially with Joanne's unique story. I didn't know what that meant for a long time. I thought maybe it meant I was special. Now I know it meant I came with a stain no one talked about. At school, when someone asked who my real parents were, I always answered, I have one mom and one dad, like everyone else. But I knew, not just in the legal sense, I felt it. Real love leaves fingerprints. It hangs your drawings on the fridge. It remembers what kind of cake you like on your birthday. It doesn't call you a spiritual test. One evening, I must have been 9, I overheard Walter praying out loud in the study. Lord, help me bear this responsibility you've given me. Strengthen my patience. Remind me why you chose her for us. I stood there, invisible in the hallway, holding the empty dinner tray he'd asked me to clear. I remember wondering, was I a child or a chore? There weren't many pictures of me in the house. Caroline kept framed collages of Benjamin's baseball games, Rachel's dance recital, even their pets. I once found a photo of myself tucked behind an expired insurance card in a drawer. I wasn't smiling. I looked like I had been told to. That was my place. Not quite hidden, but never displayed. By the time I turned 13, I'd learned how to disappear without leaving the room. That was useful in the Blake household, where visibility came with conditions, grades, achievements, obedience, and above all, silence. Benjamin, a year younger than me, had shelves lined with Little League trophies and a framed certificate from a summer math camp. Rachel, 3 years younger, had dance medals, ribbons, even a glass case with her name etched on a silver plaque. Rachel Blake Jr., Miss Grace, County 4. They both had door signs painted with nailed and proudly. Mine was a sticky note once taped outside. Laundry, do not slam. My room still smelled faintly of bleach. It had no doorbell chimes like the others. No sunlight that filtered in just right for Saturday morning reading. There was a drain in the corner floor, rusted shut. And when it rained, you could hear the gutter water humming through the pipes above. I got used to the sound. It was better than hearing the laughter upstairs. On Rachel's 16th birthday, Caroline threw her a garden brunch. There were streamers and monogrammed napkins, a string quartet from the church youth group, and a hand-carved jewelry box with a silver bracelet inside, her name engraved in cursive. Benjamin had received the same 2 years earlier. That year, I got a Bible, the used kind with dog-eared pages and notes in someone else's handwriting. Caroline had written on the inside cover, "Discipline builds character. We love you in Christ." I wasn't sure which part was supposed to comfort me. No one forgot my birthday. They just didn't celebrate it. At dinner, Walter would say, "Let's give thanks for the year Joanne's had and pray she continues to serve the Lord." Then we'd eat in silence. I always found it strange that a prayer could replace a cake. There was a time, around age 15, when I baked my own. I followed a recipe from a torn page in a church newsletter. Vanilla sponge with almond glaze. I waited all day, pretending not to notice the lack of cards or candles. I lit a match and sang softly to myself. Rachel came in halfway through the song, laughed, and said, "You're so weird." That night, as I washed the dishes, I overheard Carolyn on the phone. She was never really meant to be ours, but maybe God gave her to us so we'd learn patience. Then laughter, not cruel, just casual. I didn't cry. Instead, I wrote my name on the inside of the Bible cover. Not in cursive, just block letters, as if to say I'm still here. In church, they called me resilient. What they meant was she doesn't talk back. Agnes Whitmore lived in the house next to ours, a retired nurse, widowed young, no children of her own. People at church called her Miss Agnes with a kind of condescension reserved for older women who wore slacks and spoke their mind. But to me, she was something entirely different, unhurried time. She first waved at me through the fence when I was maybe 10, carrying a plate of molasses cookies and asking if I liked birds. I did, but I didn't know much. So she taught me names, habits, migration paths. She had feeders hanging from her oak trees and a rocking chair on her back porch, positioned just right for watching the finches come and go. After school, when Walter was at the church office and Carolyn was out preparing for some bake sale, I'd sometimes sit with Agnes. She never asked questions like, "How was school?" or "Did you pray today?" She asked, "What color was the sky at recess?" or "Did you learn something you didn't expect?" One spring afternoon, I helped her transplant tomato seedlings. My hands were covered in soil, my hair stuck to my forehead. Agnes looked at me for a long second and said, "You know, sweetheart, some flowers bloom even when no one's watching. Doesn't make them any less real." She was the first person who ever framed a picture of me. I didn't even know she'd taken it, snapped with an old disposable camera while I was laughing at a squirrel stealing strawberries from her garden. She gave it to me in a small wooden frame tied with twine. On the back, she'd written, "You are more than they see." I kept that frame hidden behind my pillow. At night, I'd hold it like a secret. Because in a world where I was constantly being measured against Scripture, against Benjamin, against what a good girl should be, Agnes never measured me at all. She just saw me. She once said, "I don't know if God lives next door, but I'm pretty sure he'd rather spend his afternoons on this porch." I believed her. By the time I turned 28, I had learned to make peace with absence. Or at least I thought I had. I'd moved to a modest apartment 2 towns over, worked at the county library, and kept my world small, predictable, quiet. That year, Thanksgiving fell late in November. I remember the leaves had already lost most of their color, and the wind carried that brittle edge that makes you zip your coat just a little higher. I hadn't planned to do anything special, but then Agnes called and said, "Why don't you cook this year? Invite them. Make the table yours." At first, I laughed. They haven't come to anything I've invited them to in the past 5 years. "But you'll know you tried," she said gently. "That matters, too." So, I cooked. I set the table with care. Ironstone plates from the thrift shop, cloth napkins folded into little triangles, cranberry sauce from scratch. I even bought a pre-lit garland for the windows and lit the pumpkin spice candle Agnes had given me the year before. I sent the invitations 3 weeks in advance. Carolyn responded with a single sentence. "We'll be hosting Benjamin and Rachel at home that day." Rachel never replied. Walter, I assumed, would go wherever Carolyn told him to. Still, I cooked. I roasted the turkey, basted it every 30 minutes, made herb stuffing, and set out rolls wrapped in a linen towel. I placed 6 chairs around my table, 1 for each of them, 1 for Agnes, and 1 for me. The clock hit 2, then 3. The food began to cool. Agnes texted that she'd been delayed at the doctor's. Nothing serious, but she'd be a while. I stared at my phone for a long time, willing it to buzz with an apology or even an excuse. It never did. At 4:15, I sat down alone. I filled a plate as if they were watching. Turkey, potatoes, cranberry, 2 rolls. I placed it at the head of the table, Walter's usual seat. And then I filled mine. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just ate slowly, each bite tasteless under the weight of all the ones that had never come. The candle flickered beside the untouched wine glasses. My chair creaked when I leaned back. Agnes arrived just before 5, bundled in her old navy coat, cheeks flushed. She took one look at the empty chairs and said nothing, just gave me a small, crumpled envelope. "I meant to give you this sooner," she said. "Been holding on to it for a long time. Thought it might matter today." Inside was a folded letter, and beneath it, a bundle of similar ones, all tied with a faded pink ribbon. "They're from someone named Evelyn," Agnes said softly. "They came every year. Your folks asked me to toss them. I didn't." The ribbon trembled in my hand. I looked at the name on the return address. Evelyn Callahan, Brooklyn, New York. I had never heard that name before, but something inside me stood up. The ribbon was soft from time and fingertips. I untied it with care, as if the whole bundle might vanish if I pulled too hard. The top letter had yellowed slightly around the edges. The handwriting, elegant, slanted, steady, began with a name I had never heard spoken aloud. "Dear Joanne, I don't know if these will ever reach you, but I write every year just in case someone, somewhere, lets one through." The letter was dated on my birthday 12 years ago. The return address matched the name Agnes had whispered, Evelyn Callahan, a stranger. And yet, with each sentence, her voice took root in places I hadn't known were empty. "You were born." When I turned 21, she wrote that she sometimes stood outside playground fences just to remember how a child's laughter sounded. By the 6th letter, I stopped wiping my eyes. I let the tears fall silently as I turned each page. There were 14 letters in all. In the final one, dated 3 years ago, she'd written, "If you never read this, I'll understand. But I want you to know I never stopped being your mother. Not in my heart. I was just never allowed to be it out loud." Agnes sat across from me the whole time, her hands folded, her face still. "They came to my door the day you were born," she said. "Said they were looking for a quiet neighborhood to raise their daughter." I didn't know the whole story until later. But when they asked me to burn those letters, she trailed off. I couldn't do it. I looked at the envelope again, the handwriting, the name, the truth I hadn't known to want. "I have to find her," I said. My voice didn't shake. It rang clear and full, as if spoken not just by me, but by the girl who never had birthday candles, the teen who sang alone, and the woman who'd set a table for ghosts. Agnes nodded, reaching for my hand. "She never stopped writing," she said. "That has to mean something." It did. I didn't call first. I wanted them to be unprepared. Caroline opened the door, wearing a Thanksgiving apron in January. Her lipstick was fresh. Her smile faltered the moment she saw me. "Joanne, we weren't expecting." "I know," I said, stepping inside. The house hadn't changed. Same stiff-backed furniture, same portraits of Benjamin and Rachel lining the hallway. Same absence of me. Walter appeared from the den, holding a coffee mug that read, "World's #1 Dad." He paused when he saw me, then sat it down without a word. "I found the letters," I said, "from Evelyn." Silence. Caroline's hand clutched the edge of the counter. Walter blinked slowly, like he hadn't heard me right. "Agnes kept them," I added. 14 in total, 1 every year. Walter looked at Carolyn. She looked at the floor. "I came here for one reason," I said. Not for apology, not for explanation, just to return the narrative. I placed the letters, still tied with the faded pink ribbon, on the table between us. I didn't untie them. I wasn't here to plead for recognition. You always told yourselves a story about how God gave you a burden to carry, about how I was some trial of patience, some moral assignment. Carolyn opened her mouth, but I raised a hand. You said I should be grateful for food, for shelter, for God's mercy. But not once in 28 years, did you ever thank me for being the child who never asked why? Walter's jaw tightened. Still no words. I know who I am now, I continued. I am Evelyn's daughter. I'm the girl who wrote her name in a used Bible and baked her own birthday cake. I'm the woman who waited 28 years to be seen and finally stopped needing it. I turned to leave. At the door, I paused. You could have let love grow here, but you chose control. And then I walked out. Outside, the air was cold but clear. Agnes was waiting in her car, parked just down the block. She didn't ask how it went, just opened the passenger door and said, "You ready?" I nodded. "Brooklyn's a long way," she added. "I've waited longer," I said. We drove in silence for a while, the letters resting between us like a passenger finally acknowledged. Brooklyn looked nothing like I remembered, not because I'd been there before, but because I'd imagined it so many times it had taken on a shape of its own. I expected something louder. Instead, I found stillness. Rows of old brownstones, narrow sidewalks littered with last week's leaves, a corner deli with hand-painted signs. Agnes waited in the car while I stood at the gate. The apartment was on the second floor. Iron railing, chipped steps, a faded wreath still hanging on the door, though Christmas had long passed. I knocked once, then again. When the door opened, it was her eyes that struck me first. Hazel, like mine. Her hair was pulled back in a loose twist, streaked with gray, but dignified. Her hands, thin, steady, rested on the edge of the frame, like she needed to hold on to something. "Yes," she asked, cautious. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. So, I reached into my coat pocket and handed her the top letter, the first one she'd ever written. She looked at it, then at me. "Joanne," she whispered, like she didn't believe her own voice. I nodded. Her hand went to her mouth, but the tears came before the words. She stepped back and opened the door wider, and I walked in. There were no dramatic hugs, no music swelling in the background, just the creak of old floorboards and the quiet sound of two lives rejoining at the seams. She made tea. I sat at her kitchen table, scarred, worn, real. She brought out a photo album I'd never seen, but somehow already knew. "This was you," she said, pointing to a sonogram taped inside the cover. "This is where you started." We talked until the tea went cold. She never asked about them. She only asked about me, what I liked to read, what made me laugh, what I dreamed of when I was little. And for the first time in my life, I answered. 1 year later, I set the table again. Same iron plates, same cloth napkins, washed and pressed. But this time, the table felt full even before anyone sat down. Not because I expected it to be, but because I had chosen who belonged there. Evelyn brought sweet potatoes with cinnamon and nutmeg.